This is a restricted engineering space. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. The voice, thin and sharp with the unearned confidence of a new uniform, cut through the oppressive heat and the thrum of auxiliary machinery. Madison Reed didn't turn. Her focus was on the silent monolithic grey bulk of the number 2 main gas turbine engine. It was a masterpiece of controlled power, a caged hurricane designed to push 10,000 tons of American warship through the water at over 30 knots. Right now, it was as quiet and useless as a museum piece. She set her heavy canvas tool bag down on the diamond plate deck with a soft, deliberate thud. The sound was small, but in the tense quiet of the main machinery room, it felt loud. Only then did she turn to face the young officer. He was a lieutenant junior grade, his gold bar gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. His face was flushed, a mixture of the ambient heat and his own agitation. "I'm aware of where I am, Lieutenant," Madison said. Her voice was calm, low, and even, a stark contrast to the vibrating energy of the room. The officer, whose name tape read Barlow, puffed out his chest slightly. "This area is for ship's force and authorized technical representatives only. Your escort should have known that." Madison held up her laminated badge. It had her photo, her name, and the bold letters of a well-known naval contractor. "I'm an authorized technical representative." Barlow squinted at the badge as if he'd never seen one before. "I was told the tech rep was a Mr. Henderson." "Mr. Henderson is back at Norfolk trying to figure out why the schematics you sent him don't match what his diagnostic models are showing," Madison replied, her gaze drifting back to the dormant turbine. "He sent me instead. Now, if you'll excuse me, this ship is dead in the water, and I'm on a clock." She knelt, unzipping her bag. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was a collection of tools. Some were standard issue, polished and pristine. Others were not. They were strange, modified, bearing the scars of hard use and bespoke fabrication. "I need to see your work order, and I need to verify your credentials with the quarter deck," Barlow insisted, stepping forward to block her access to the engine casing. A few of the enlisted sailors, members of the engineering watch team, stopped what they were doing to observe. Their faces slick with sweat were masks of weary curiosity. They had been fighting this problem for 3 straight days. They were exhausted, frustrated, and now they had a floor show. Madison sighed, a barely audible breath. She rose slowly, her 5 feet 8 inches frame clad in crimson coveralls that seemed to soak up the dim light of the space. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe, practical bun, but a few stray strands clung to her temples. She pulled a folded document from her pocket and handed it to him. Then she waited, her posture relaxed, her hands loose at her sides. She had been in this exact situation, or one very much like it, more times than she could count. The setting changed. Destroyers, carriers, amphibious assault ships, but the players were always the same. There was always a Barlow. He read the work order, his lips moving silently, his frown deepened. "This is highly irregular. Admiral Hayes signed this personally. A direct tasking from Fleet Forces Command. The Admiral wants his ship to move," Madison said simply. "He tends to get what he wants." Barlow's jaw tightened. He was a man who lived by the book, by the rigid, comforting hierarchy of the chain of command. A work order from an admiral was a document of immense power, but the person presenting it didn't fit his mental image. She was a civilian, and she was standing in his engine room as if she owned it. He pulled out his radio. "Quarter deck. Engineering bridge. Verify visitor credentials for a Madison Reed civilian contractor." The response crackled back a moment later. "Engineering quarter deck. Miss Reed is cleared for all engineering spaces. Orders from the captain. She's the Admiral specialist." The confirmation didn't seem to soothe Barlow. It agitated him further. He handed the work order back. His movement stiff. "Fine, but all work will be conducted under my direct supervision, and you will follow all established naval maintenance procedures to the letter. No shortcuts, no non-standard modifications." His eyes fell on the contents of her tool bag, specifically on a long, slender wrench with a strangely angled head and a handle wrapped in worn leather cord. It looked like something forged in a blacksmith's shop, not issued by a supply depot. And that, he said, pointing a rigid finger. What is that? That's not a standard issue torque wrench. Madison glanced at the tool. No, it's not. You won't be using unauthorized equipment on my turbine, Barlow stated, his voice rising slightly. We have calibrated tools for every application. We will follow the maintenance requirement card precisely. Madison's gaze lingered on the wrench. For a fleeting second, the heat and hum of the engine room faded, replaced by a different memory. The high-pitched scream of a grinder, the acrid smell of hot steel, and the violent lurch of a ship taking heavy seas. The frantic, desperate energy of a dark space lit only by emergency battle lanterns. She had made that wrench herself 12 years ago in the middle of the Arabian Gulf. From a sheared-off piece of a mounting bracket, they were running dark, trying to evade detection when a seawater coolant line had fractured at a joint, inaccessible to any standard tool. They had 6 hours to fix it before the engines overheated and they became a sitting duck. She had 30 minutes to invent a solution. The wrench was that solution. It had saved the ship. The leather on the handle was from the glove of the chief who had held the metal steady for her while she worked. He'd lost his life on a later deployment. The wrench wasn't just a tool. It was a relic. She brought herself back to the present. Lieutenant, the book you've been following for the last 72 hours has left this warship drifting. I'm here to write a new page. Now, are you going to let me work or do I need to call the Admiral and tell him you're obstructing a fleet-level directive? The challenge hung in the air, thick and heavy. Barlow's face went from red to a pale mottled white. He was being directly confronted, his authority questioned in front of his own sailors. He knew he was on shaky ground, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. Your lack of respect for naval procedure is astounding, he hissed, his voice low. You will address me by my rank, and you will not touch that engine until the chief engineer is present to supervise. He was stalling, looking for an escape, for a way to reassert his control. But he had already lost the room. The older sailors, the first and second-class petty officers, were looking at Madison with a new respect. They recognized the quiet, unshakable confidence of someone who had been there, done that, and fixed it when no one else could. Unseen by Barlow, standing in the shadows near the entrance to the machinery space, was another figure. Master Chief Petty Officer Thorne, the senior enlisted leader of the entire engineering department. He had been drawn by the unusual silence from the main space. He was a mountain of a man with a graying flat top and hands the size of dinner plates. He had served on 6 different classes of ship and had forgotten more about gas turbines than Barlow would ever learn from a book. He had been listening for the last 5 minutes, his expression unreadable. He watched Barlow posture and pin, and he watched the woman in the red coveralls stand her ground without raising her voice. Then he heard the name again, spoken by Barlow in a tone of utter disdain. I don't care if your name is Madison Reed or an angel from heaven. You will follow my orders in my space. The name struck a chord deep in the Master Chief's memory. Madison Reed, Maddie the Wrench Reed. It was a name spoken with reverence in the chief's mess of his last command. A legend from the generation just before his. They said she could diagnose an engine imbalance just by the vibration in the deck plates. They said she once rewired a main distribution board during a fire, using a pair of pliers and her own ingenuity to bypass 3 fried circuits, restoring power to the combat systems just as they were about to engage. He had always assumed the stories were sea yarns, exaggerated tales told over coffee, but here she was, and this fresh-faced lieutenant was about to commit a career-ending mistake. Thorne saw Barlow raise his hand, about to signal the master arms he had summoned on his radio. I'm having you escorted to the master at arms shack. We will investigate your credentials further. I suspect they may be fraudulent. That was it. The breaking point. Master Chief Thorne faded back into the quay, pulling out his personal cell phone. He didn't call the ship's captain. That would be a messy breach of the chain of command. He scrolled through his contacts to a number he rarely used. The direct line to the Force Master Chief on the Admiral's staff. The phone was answered on the second ring. Force Master Chief, this is Master Chief Thorne on the Patriot. I have an urgent situation. He spoke quickly, his voice a low rumble. Sir, they have Matty Reed down here in MMR2. The legend. It's really her. The Admiral flew her out, but our new engineering officer of the watch is treating her like a spy. He's about to have her thrown off the ship. Sir, she's the only shot we have at fixing this engine. You need to tell the Admiral now. Aboard the fleet's flagship 50 nautical miles away. The message traveled from the Force Master Chief to the Admiral's flag aide and then to the Admiral himself. In less than a minute, Admiral Hayes was a tall, lean man with a face carved from granite and eyes that had seen the world's oceans in both peace and war. He was in the middle of a video conference with the Pentagon. Sir, his aide interrupted, whispering urgently, it's about the specialist on the Patriot. The Admiral muted the conference call. What is it, sir? It's Madison Reed. Master Chief Reed, formerly the engineering officer on station, is creating an issue. He's refusing her access to the engine. Admiral Hayes went still. A flicker of something disbelief, then anger, then resolve passed through his eyes. Reed, you're certain it's her? Master Chief Thorne on the Patriot confirmed it. Sir, she's there, and the LTJGG in charge is about to have her detained. The Admiral stood up, his chair scraping back. Get her service record on the main screen. Now, a few keystrokes and Madison Reed's history filled the 60 inches monitor. It was a career's worth of excellence, compressed into data. Multiple Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medals. A Navy Combination Medal with AV for Valor. Page after page of evaluations where every single block was marked early. Promote. There were notes from commanding officers calling her a once-in-a-generation technician and a miracle worker. Tucked away was a citation for action taken aboard the USS Stalwart during a strait transit under hostile surveillance, citing her for extraordinary ingenuity and decisive action in preventing a catastrophic engineering casualty, directly ensuring the ship's survivability and mission success. Admiral Hayes looked at the screen, then at his aide. That woman saved my ship and my career when I was a commander. Get me a helicopter. I want rotors turning in 5 minutes. And get the captain of the Patriot on a secure line. Tell him I'm on my way and tell him to ensure that absolutely no one interferes with Miss Reed's work or they'll be explaining themselves to me personally. Back on the USS Patriot, Barlow was feeling the flush of victory. He had asserted his authority. He had faced down the civilian contractor and won. The two master-at-arms, a burly first class and a stern-faced second-ass, had arrived and were standing behind Madison. Miss Reed, your services are no longer required, Barlow said, his voice dripping with condescension. I am officially revoking your access to this space. I believe you may be a security risk. You will be escorted off this vessel at the earliest opportunity. Now hand over that unauthorized tool. He gestured to the custom wrench in her bag. It was the ultimate overreach, the final arrogant insult. Madison looked at him, then at the sailors watching, then at the silent engine. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just waited. She had set the pieces in motion, and she knew with the certainty of a perfectly balanced turbine that the system would eventually correct itself. It started as a low, rhythmic thumping. A vibration felt more than heard. It grew steadily louder, a menacing whump, whump whump that vibrated through the steel hull of the ship. It was the unmistakable sound of a Sea Hawk helicopter in a fast approach. Barlow's confident expression faltered. He glanced up at the overhead, perplexed. Then the ship's main communication circuit, the 1MC, crackled to life. The voice of the officer of the deck echoing through every space. Attention on the USS Patriot. The fleet commander is on approach. Set flight quarters. Set flight quarters. Admiral Hayes arriving. The blood drained from Barlow's face. The fleet commander. Here now. It made no sense. The master-at-arms exchanged nervous glances. The entire engineering crew froze, their eyes wide. The clatter of footsteps on the metal ladders leading down to the main machinery spaces preceded the arrivals. First came the ship's captain, his face a grim, stone-like mask. Behind him was the executive officer and the chief engineer, whose expression was one of pure unadulterated dread, and then, descending into the oppressive heat of the engine room came Admiral Hayes. The 2 silver stars on his collar seemed to catch and amplify the light. He was flanked by his flag aide and a sharp-eyed female commander who served as his chief of staff. The Admiral's gaze swept the room, taking in the scene. The silent engine, the sweat-soaked sailors, the armed guards, Lieutenant Barlow standing ramrod straight, and Madison Reed calm as a summer sea standing beside her tool bag. The Admiral ignored everyone else. He walked directly to Madison, his boots ringing on the deck plates. The room was so quiet that the hum of the ventilation system sounded like a roar. He stopped a foot in front of her. He didn't salute. She was a civilian, but his entire bearing was one of profound respect. "Chief Reed," he said, his voice a low baritone that commanded absolute attention. He used her old rank, and the effect was electric. "It's been too long? I'm sorry you were delayed. It seems we have a junior officer who has trouble telling the difference between a problem and a solution." He turned his gaze on the assembled crew, his eyes sweeping over them before landing with crushing weight on Lieutenant Barlow. "Gentlemen," the Admiral began, his voice resonating with authority. "You have been working on this engine for 3 days. You've had the best shoreside support, the newest manuals, the most advanced diagnostic equipment, and you have failed because you were trying to solve a new problem with an old book." He gestured toward Madison. "Let me tell you who this is. This is not Miss Reed, the civilian contractor. This is former Senior Chief Gas Turbine Systems Technician Madison Reed. This is the woman who, as a second-as petty officer, jury-rigged the primary coolant system on the USS Stalwart with nothing more than coffee pot tubing and AP-100 fire pump, while we were in the Strait of Hormuz, surrounded by hostile patrol boats. That repair, which is not in any manual, saved my ship from a catastrophic fire and allowed us to complete our mission." He took a step closer to Barlow, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet level. "This is the chief who rewired a 400 Hz switchboard in the middle of a general quarters drill blindfolded in under 5 minutes because she believed in being ready for the absolute worst case scenario. This is the woman who wrote half the diagnostic procedures your technical manuals are based on, procedures that apparently none of you were able to execute correctly." He pointed a finger at a specific component on the turbine, a fuel control governor that was buried deep within the machinery, and I would wager my stars that she is the only person on this side of the planet who knows how to reach in a worn turbine bearing using a hand file and a bottle of polishing compound. She has saved the Navy more money than the cost of your entire department's annual budget, and she has saved more lives than you have sailors under your command, Lieutenant. A murmur went through the assembled engineers. They were staring at Madison with a new, profound sense of awe. The sea story was real. The legend was standing in their engine room. The Admiral's attention snapped back to Barlow, his eyes like chips of ice. "Your job, Lieutenant, is to solve the problem, to get this ship moving. The solution was delivered to your doorstep and you tried to have it arrested. You didn't look at the work order's authority. You didn't look at the expertise in front of you. You looked at a woman in red coveralls and made an assumption. You put your pride ahead of the mission. That is a failure of leadership I will not tolerate in my fleet." The condemnation was absolute, a public crucifixion. Barlow stood, swaying slightly, his career flashing before his eyes. It was Madison who broke the silence. She stepped forward, her voice still even and calm. "Admiral," she said, addressing him with practiced ease. "With all due respect, the lieutenant was following procedure. He was trying to protect his equipment. The procedures are the problem. They don't account for situations like this. You don't soften the standards. You just have to apply them fairly to everyone, regardless of what they are wearing." Her wisdom was a splash of cool water on a hot fire. She wasn't asking for an apology or for revenge. She was asking for a smarter system. She was, as always, focused on fixing the problem. As she spoke, the Admiral's mention of the Stalwart brought another flash of memory to her. She saw herself, 25 years old, covered in grease and sprayed with hot brackish water. She was desperately wrapping the scavenged silver tubing. From a galley coffee maker around a leaking coolant line, her hands raw. A young commander, a much younger Admiral Hayes, was standing over her, his face a mask of extreme doubt. He had watched her work for 10 solid minutes before the doubt was replaced by a look of dawning, absolute respect. She had proven herself to him then, just as she was being forced to prove herself all over again. Now, Admiral Hayes nodded slowly, accepting her point. He looked at Barlow. One last time. Consider this the most important lesson of your career, Lieutenant. Now get out of the way and let a master work. With the full authority of the fleet behind her, Madison opened her tool bag. She moved with an economy of motion that was mesmerizing to watch. She ignored the advanced diagnostics cart and instead pulled out a simple mechanic stethoscope. She placed the tip against the engine casing, closed her eyes, and listened. For a full minute, the only sound was the quiet hum of the ship's ventilation. Then her eyes snapped open. There, she said, pointing to a spot near the fuel intake manifold. It's a hairline fracture in the number 3 fuel atomizer. It's not spraying, it's dripping. Not enough to register on your sensors as a leak, but just enough to throw off the fuel-air mixture on ignition. The turbine's computer sees the imbalance and aborts the startup sequence to prevent damage. She picked up her custom-made wrench. It was the only tool that could reach the deeply recessed retaining bolt. She had the atomizer assembly disconnected in under 2 minutes. Using a small, high-intensity light, she showed the chief engineer the minuscule crack. It was barely visible to the naked eye, a flaw so small it had been missed by 3 days of conventional troubleshooting. The next few hours were a masterclass in engineering. Madison didn't just fix the problem. She taught. She directed the ship sailors, explaining not just the what, but the why of every action. They replaced the faulty part, and she showed them how to test the new one for microfractures, using dye and a blacklight, a technique not yet in the official manuals. The enlisted sailors, who had been wary and exhausted, worked with a new energy, their respect for her growing with every confident command and clear explanation. An hour later, Madison Reed stood back, wiped her hands on a red rag, and nodded to the chief engineer. Light it off. The startup sequence began. This time, there was no abort. A low whine grew into a powerful deafening roar as 10,000 horsepower of controlled combustion came to life. The deck plates vibrated with a healthy, familiar power. The USS Patriot was no longer dead in the water. Later that evening, in the ship's mess, Madison was drinking a cup of coffee when Lieutenant Barlow approached. He stood before her, his posture no longer rigid with false authority, but slumped with humility. "Miss Reed," he began, his voice quiet. "I was wrong. There's no other way to say it. My arrogance nearly cost this ship its mission. I am truly sorry." Madison looked at him, seeing not the arrogant officer from the engine room, but a young, insecure leader who had been given too much responsibility and not enough experience. "Apology accepted, Lieutenant," she said. "But don't be sorry. Be better. Your sailors have the answers. They live in those spaces. Trust them and trust the fact that expertise doesn't always come in the uniform you expect." She took a sip of her coffee. "Listen to your chiefs. They've seen it all." A week later, a fleet-wide instruction was issued, mandating a new training module on the integration and verification of civilian technical experts. Attached to the instruction was an update to the gas turbine system's NSTM detailing the Reed procedure for diagnosing atomizer micro fractures. Madison Reed's story became a new kind of sea yarn, a testament to the fact that true valor isn't always about combat, and the most powerful weapon on a warship is sometimes the brilliant mind and steady hands of an unassuming hero in red coveralls. Madison Reed's story is a testament to the fact that expertise wears many uniforms and sometimes none at all. If you were inspired by her unwavering competence, hit that like button, subscribe to She Chose Valor, and share this story to honor all our veterans.